Welcome to Problem Solving, Effective and Efficient. This is part of our eBit series. Our eBit series are tidbits of e-learning information designed for 10 to 15 minutes of education that helps you decide what your next moves are. You can certainly look for our e-webinars, which are 60 to 90 minutes, or our e-workshops, which are 1 day to full days of training. Let's move forward. Here's the big caution with problem solving. Jack Welch is the former and successful CEO of GE, General Electric, and he stated that the worst thing about a decision is a non-decision. So clearly stating we are speaking about problem solving, which is actually part of decision making. And when you're making decisions or not making a decision, that's a problem. And if it's a problem, then you need to have a decision made on how you're going to resolve or work through that problem. Else it just gets worse. The worst thing about a decision is a non-decision. This is why you need to learn how to problem solve, a method that you consistently take your problems through. In fact, if you're a leader, you should teach others your method so they understand how you think, that when they start encountering problems, they take it through that method as well. If they have a different method, but it's a consistent method that brings good results, that's fine. But it's important that they understand how you make decisions as well. If you report to another decision maker, ask them how they problem solve. If they have a consistent method, learn their method, you learn how they think, and even if your method's different, you can take it to your method, run it past theirs, and many times you come to the same decision. And you actually get much better at it. However, there are danger signs, and we spoke about them in our decision-making e-learning, and we teach them in our workshops. The danger in any decision-making arise in several areas. It's paralysis from analysis. There are those that they lead with, they're analytical. However, if you have to wait for too much data, or if you have to dig into too much data, sometimes that can bring what we call paralysis. You're just making yourself stop, and nothing's being done with that decision. So you have to measure how much data do you need. Certainly you need to know about, let's define what the problem is, let's find out the exact facts, and sometimes you have to make some educated assumptions. That's all part of the data, but it's important that you have a process and that you have a timeline. Next is what we call management by committee. This is what we call weak leadership. It's weak leadership when it's just a regular decision in the business, and it's extremely weak leadership when it's a problem. Now, we're not saying don't get others' opinions or advice or feedback. They might have great information that adds to what the problem is, or how to define a solution. But if you need to manage by committee, meaning everyone gets 25% of this decision, that's weak leadership. Gain your feedback, gain your opinions, even disagreements, but ultimately you as a decision maker have to make the best decision for the business moving forward. One of the biggest problems I see is individuals, and especially those in leadership, have no set process in which they take a problem through. No set questions that helps define what the problem is. No set questions to define what's the information needed, and do I have the information? Are there educated assumptions? What are the plans that we can do? What is plan A? What is plan B? What we call alternatives. And then what does the end in mind look like? It's very important that before a problem arises, you need to have a set process and that others are trained on this as well. If you don't, you need to define one. Thinking about what's the end in mind. It's one of the first questions you need to ask once you define what the problem is. What does success look like, and can we get there? It might be multiple ends in mind. It might be stages, but ultimately you need one end in mind, and then you work backwards. That's part of your set process that we discussed. We talk about seek first to understand. Well, obviously, we talked about paralysis from analysis, where we don't want the data to slow you up or you need too much data, but you do need to truly understand what the problem is, what the data and information you have or that you need, and how to find it and quickly get to and arise to that. And then what is it that you need to make the decision? So always seek first to understand and don't do things blindly. You need confidence in pulling the trigger, though. And as a leader, the more experience and knowledge that you have, you'll be known for being instinctful on how you solve problems. Sometimes they might say that you make decisions based on your gut, but that's not true. It's truly your gut of experience and your knowledge that you've had. What's real important with leadership is that great leaders make decisions. Obviously, they value feedback and opinions, and they teach this before problems arise. We want your feedback and opinions. It's okay to be vulnerable, that you say you disagree with me, because your feedback and opinions will help us determine the better decisions. Two, that you've developed a consistent method, and if you're the leader, that you shared it with others. But also that you rely on experience, your experience, and in the experience of others based upon the decision or the problem. Next one is calculated risk. Many times we have to take calculated risk, but that's not blind risk. Calculated risk is based upon experience and knowledge and educated assumptions. And then finally, you have to be confident and decisive. Great leaders are decisive, and they will have a following of people that follow them because they're great leaders who are confident and decisive. Biggest thing about problem solving. Effective leaders have a problem solving process. We preached this over and over already in this short e-learning. But more importantly, they teach it to the staff. If you haven't been taught by your decision maker, ask them, what is your common problem solving method? I'd like to learn it so I can understand how you think. They utilize that method consistently. They utilize it instinctively. Their gut is from experience, as mentioned. Assumptions are calculated and educated, and their risks are calculated and educated as well. Everything at the end of the day starts with the values and the principles foundation, that whatever decisions they make and coming out of that problem have to adhere to their values and principles. Extremely important. Let's briefly talk about the method. As I mentioned, great leaders have a consistent method and they teach it to their staff. They don't always tie their staff in using that method. They can, but they teach the staff their method so the staff understands their thought process. But what are the key steps to problem solving? Here's what we teach in our in-depth workshops where we take them through problems. We even bring past problems of the organization that we can work them through the consistent method that we teach. And we actually take them around a baseball diamond, and we'll speak to that in a minute. But we teach them first to remember the 7 habits. The 7 habits of highly effective people come from the book by Stephen Covey. Great book. And the 7 habits can be utilized in all professions and all levels of decision making. But it's to be proactive, to put first things first, think win-win, begin with the end in mind, seek first to understand, to synergize and sharpen the saw. You have to remember all 7 habits and walk them through. We always preach, have that part of your written problem solving method for each one, and it makes it a lot easier because you have to define what is the problem. Then, what do we want? This is the problem, but really, what do we want is what is the end in mind? What's the information and insight that we need so we ensure we get it? What is the feedback and opinions of others? We want that, but we will ultimately make the decisions. What are the alternatives and the consequences for each one? Here are a couple alternatives. Here's what possibly might occur. But then there's a point that we have to choose which way we're going to go. We have to plan it out with an action plan, and we have to execute it. But with everything we do, we have to have an evaluation process and a way that we assess it. That way we always get better in our decisions and we think about what we might have done differently. This is where I talk about the baseball diamond. We briefly, home plate was always values and principles, because if you understand baseball, where you start is where you want to finish. So if we took a problem around the bases, we wanted to finish back on ensuring that we adhered to our values and principles. First base was always based upon that decision maker's roadblock or hangup that they consistently have, and we each have them. For example, I once had a decision maker that made decisions in anger. So first base to them was anger and danger. I wanted to ensure that before they moved ahead in the decision making process, they needed to get past their anger and danger. Second base is where they defined what the problem was. What is it? What do I know? And what do I think I know? Which means educated assumptions. Let's define all the data that we need, information and insight, because when we go to third base, that's when we work on knowledge and our decision, where we talk about alternatives and consequences, and then we choose plan do, we execute, we evaluate, and we make it to home plate, and we say, are we still standing on our values and principles because we just scored a run? That's great. Remember that the foundation is always the values and the principles, which sits below the surface, and then your practices, which barely shows above, but it's everything else you do, is still resting on the values and the principles. That's probably one of the most important keys for me to emphasize. Here's a great quote before we go. If all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. That's why it's important to go out and learn from others, teach others how you make decisions, but don't be blind or hesitant to see methods from others. Thank you very much. Thank you for attending. Please, listed is my email, mark@markvillarreal.com, and our website, www.markvillarreal.com as well. Phone number is also listed, but please subscribe to our YouTube and you'll be notified when new videos or e-learnings come out. Thank you.